The other day I was running in the woods. Right here outside my home, just a few streets away, is the start of a beautiful forest. And now that the light shines a little bit more than in earlier months and the temperatures are starting to rise, it's almost as if this forest that has been barren and dead, or seemingly dead for most of the winter, starts to come alive. The first thing that struck me while I was running through the forest was the sound of all these birds. I couldn't see them. They were invisible. Most of them are colored in brown and colors that hide them from potential enemies. But what I could hear was unmistakably the sound of springtime. They were singing out and filling this big empty forest with their song. And then the sun started to shine, and especially in the morning, you've got that little bit of morning mist, and it formed these beams, these rays of sunshine that hit the ground, and everywhere it hit the forest floor, it was almost as if there were pots of gold all over the place. It was absolutely marvelous. It was almost magical. It felt like I was walking in Middle Earth. That's how beautiful it was. And then that same day, we heard the news that the war in Ukraine had started, that the Russian armies had started to cross the border and had commenced bombardings, not just in a certain region of the country, but from all sides the country was attacked. And we've seen day by day this war rhetoric grow in intensity. And it was almost as if there were these two worlds. There was this beautiful, magical place in the forest, so much filled with promise of springtime and hope and light. And on the other side, we saw these images of gloom and doom, of this threat, this fear, this incredible evil that seemed to seep into our world with an intensity that we've rarely witnessed, and with a threat that keeps us on the edge of our seats. What's going to happen next? How far is this going to go? Even today, before I prepared this Mass, I heard that now Putin has threatened to maybe use nuclear weapons. Is there anything more frightening than the prospect of the use of the most destructive things that people have ever created in history, in the history of this planet? Something that could destroy us all. Is there anything darker that you can imagine than that? Light and darkness. It is as if we're in a story, in a bad dream. And if sometimes you have that when you're half asleep and you switch from one beautiful dream straight into a nightmare. And that's kind of how it feels. And it's so difficult to figure out what to do and how to behave. And the other day I was just browsing cat video after cat video just to appease my mind. I just needed a laugh. I just needed something that could take me out of this grim reality and just make me smile and just reduce the world to the simplicity of a cat doing funny cat things. I think we've all been there, and maybe that is still something that we would love to do, just escape from this reality. However, we're in the midst of it, and we need to somehow relate to this. And if we come together to reflect on the Bible stories that we've been given today, it is our duty, I think, to ask ourselves how God wants us to play this role in the world. What can we do? If there was a simple recipe for that, I would tell you right away. But this is such a complex global problem, and it is so unthinkable of what is happening that we feel extremely powerless. And this reminds me very much of my first experience in reading The Lord of the Rings. When I started reading, I had first read The Hobbit. It was one of the things I read I think I was 11 or 12 years old. And my father had given me his copy. It was this worn down pocket version of The Hobbit, and the pages were already brown, and he'd read it as a student, and then he handed it over to me, and I read through that story, but that still felt very much like a fairy tale. But then, so gripped by the story, I started to read The Lord of the Rings, and the first few chapters were just so beautiful and described this wonderful shire with the green meadows and the little hobbit holes, and then, Frodo would just sit there under a tree reading a book, and the sun was shining and the birds were chirping. I was like, okay, I love this world. This is where I want to be. And then all of a sudden, that peace is disturbed, is changed by this wizard who arrives and tells Frodo that something is about to happen. And he cannot stay in that safe, small shire, but actually Frodo discovers through Gandalf that he is part of a much bigger story, a story that he could never have conceived within the confines of this small hobbit world. And he discovers that he has a role to play because there is this ring that nobody dares to touch, because it is extremely dangerous. And Bilbo, unbeknownst of what that ring actually holds in terms of power, has been keeping that on his own body. It almost became like a talisman, something that he needed to have close to feel safe. And the ring started to, it gave him a long life, much longer than any other hobbit. But at the same time, it was eating him up from the inside. And it is then brought to our attention that this ring symbolizes the power of evil that needs to be destroyed for Middle-earth to be safe. And if this power wins, if this ring gets a hold of someone else who is already powerful, who has the ability to use Middle-earth for this warfare, then the entirety of Middle-earth is in mortal danger. And so, for one reason or another, this very small hobbit Frodo, part of a people who never played any role of significance in Middle-earth, is chosen to be the bearer of the ring. And later on in the story, we discover why Frodo? Why this little hobbit and not a powerful knight or a strong dwarf with an axe? No, it's this hobbit. Why he? But what this story is also conveying is the reality that is behind the story. As I told you in the beginning of this Mass, Tolkien had lived through the horrors of the First World War. He himself has been a soldier, and it made a lasting impression on him and confronted him with the awful reality of what war does to people and how much it destroys everything that is good, everything that he believed in. And then later, when he was writing already The Lord of the Rings, the Second World War began. And his own sons were enlisted for the army, and he wrote letters to Christopher, who was distraught. He was in turmoil because he was training to become a fighter pilot, and he felt so constrained in that military environment, and it was so unlike anything that his father had taught him to live and what life was about. Tolkien was a storyteller. He would sit at the in a chair or at the bed of his children telling these fairy tales. And now his own children were on the doorstep of this new war that was even bigger and more horrific than the previous one. And then at one point, Tolkien writes to Christopher, "Always remember that hobbitry in your heart." I love that hobbitry. There is a bit of a hobbit in you. And he doesn't just mean this like small, nice, protected world of the Shire, but he means there is something of that courage in you, something that no matter how small you feel and how overwhelmed you are by world's events, that little hobbit that I told you about, Bilbo and later on Frodo, that's also who you can be. So never forget that. And realize, that's the next thing he writes to Christopher, realize that you are part of this huge story that is way bigger than just your life. This is a story that has been told throughout history, and you've got your little hobbit role to play in that story. That's how Tolkien tried to encourage Christopher. And I think that Christopher has taken that by heart, and it's not by accident that he dedicated his entire life, even after the death of his father, to this legacy of Tolkien, so that the world would read these stories and learn from the stories. Because there is an essential element in the story of Middle-earth and the history of Middle-earth that we also encounter in the Gospel, in the Bible readings of today. And it has to do with what Jesus tells the people that listen to him. And he talks about teachers and pupils, and how much you have to listen to your teacher and try to become like the teacher. Instead of thinking that you already know everything, he wants his disciples, his followers, to learn from him, to look at what does he do, and to follow that example so that they can follow his footsteps later on when he's no longer there. That is what any great teacher hopes, is that the next generation will follow in your footsteps, will benefit from the lessons that you taught, and will emulate your behavior. So what is the lesson that Jesus constantly tries to convey to his disciples? It's very simple. If you want to be great in this world, realize how small you are. If you want to bring light in the world, start in your own heart by removing the darkness. Instead of constantly trying to focus on what's wrong with the world and with others, like the Pharisees did and the scribes. You know, that person is evil, that person is wrong, that one doesn't belong here, that person should be excluded from society. Instead, that's pointing at the splinters in other people's eyes. Jesus says, don't you forget about the big, planks. It's a typical carpenter example in a certain way. Don't you see this huge plank in your own eye? Start, if you want to change the world, start with yourself. Remove what is evil in yourself. And then he continues with that image of a tree and its fruits. And the reason that these two are probably in the same story is that in Greek, and of course the original Gospel of Luke was written in Greek, if I'm not mistaken, the word for splinter and fruit they sound similar in Greek. So it's like a little word play for if you really pay attention. I see what you did there. But anyway, what Jesus tries to explain in this second example of the tree is that if you work on yourself, if you are spending energy on changing your own heart and making it good, like a tree, and he used that example before, a tree that stands firm, even in the storm or in periods of drought. If you have your roots in the ground firmly, close to the sources of living water, then you will bear fruit, you will stand strong. Nothing can destroy you. And so it's this emphasis on your own responsibility and your own role in the history, in the story of the world. Now, this is something that Jesus constantly shows in his actions. He's not just preaching, he's showing it in every little moment of attention that he gives to the weak, to the poor, to the sinners. He's always there to help them. He is good, even for the people that treat him horribly. The only thing that Jesus hates is when people are hypocrites, when they're not honest. If someone has made mistakes in his life, he's ready to forgive. But someone who's a hypocrite doesn't think he needs to be forgiven. He is so full of himself that he can't be full of God. And so Jesus there, that's the only category of people that he can't really change. It's up to them to first remove what's in their eye, remove what's evil in their heart, and then, maybe then, if they convert, he can fill their hearts with something else than just evil. And so Jesus shows in every action that he does, in every miracle that he does, that there's only good in him. And that translates in miracles that changed the world around him, that changed the lives of people that were given up by everyone. But it's because Jesus is filled with the love of his Father, and he can change those lives sometimes in a supernatural way, something that is not physically, not humanly possible. Those stories are told to us to encourage us that even in the worst situations where all hope seems lost, this light that shines within Jesus' heart can pierce through the darkness like those rays of sunlight can enter this forest and hit the ground and make things grow and let the birds sing. This light, even though it's just one sunbeam, can warm up everything, can give people hope. And that is exactly why Frodo is chosen to be the ring bearer. He is one of the purest characters in the entire story. There is no greed in him or evil. Even his uncle Bilbo was still sometimes in his behavior a bit more erratic, but Frodo is just this very, very naive, but also just extremely good guy. And it is because he is so good and his heart is filled with stories and generosity that evil has no hold on him. It's like water on a duck. It doesn't stick. And that is why he is much more the one who can carry this burden of the ring and put an end to it and to its power, because his heart is pure. And then there is a second element that is super important in how Tolkien tells the story of light, no matter how small, overcoming this oppressive darkness in the world. And that is fellowship. It's friendship. Who is the one who ultimately ends up carrying Frodo when his forces are gone, when he's completely destroyed by all the darkness outside and inside him through the power of the ring? It's Sam. Sam is a friend that shows that he is a friend because he is ready to give his life to save Frodo, just like Jesus was and is a friend who is willing to give his life so that other people can live. This is why the story of The Lord of the Rings is so, to its core, so Catholic, because it is a reflection of what Jesus does in the gospel. He is saving us not by being powerful, not by displaying himself as one of those gods that people come up with in their stories, who's just the big fixer, the one who's always in control, the one who's just basically, the world is like a theater and he's just watching it in amusement, just like Loki, manipulating everyone for his own amusement. The God of the gospel is not like that. He doesn't sit back and just watch what's happening. He becomes one of us to carry the weight of evil on his own shoulders. The cross that he carries all the way to Calvary is a symbol of that oppressive evil that is killing, and that for mere humans is almost impossible to carry alone. But he comes as our friend to carry it for us, just like Frodo carries it for all the others in Middle-earth. And his friends are at his side. The fellowship of the ring are the friends that are with him to accompany him in that quest to put an end to evil. You see, also the opposite in The Lord of the Rings. When I posted the thumbnail for this Mass, I deliberately chose this very striking image of Saruman, who was actually called to be a being of light, just like Gandalf. These are very ancient beings who are supposed to shepherd, to help the people and the peoples of Middle-earth. And instead, Saruman has fallen victim to his own greed. His heart is filled with darkness. You don't see it on the outside. Just like the best villains, from the outside, they don't look that menacing, but on the inside, it's total corruption. And he stretches out his hand over this palantir, this old seeing stone that connects him to Sauron, this fiery eye who looks at the world with pure evil, only intent on destroying everything in this blazing fire. And Saruman is his puppet. He is completely in the grips of this evil, and when Gandalf discovers that that is what's going on in the heart of Saruman, he knows that he's lost him. He knows that Saruman is consumed by evil and cannot do anything but evil. And then Tolkien makes that very physical, and you see that also in the Peter Jackson movies, where basically Saruman is destroying everything that's beautiful in Middle-earth, the trees, the nature, and it's all used as fuel for his war machine. And from the earth is not born beautiful life that awakens nature and touches the heart and is beautiful in its simplicity. No, what comes from the earth are these Urukwai, who are just these mixed, unnatural beings, the orcs mixed in with all sorts of other influences, and it's just pure evil. Because Saruman is unable to create beauty. Even his tower looks like something evil, like a weapon. There's nothing beautiful that can ever come from the heart of Saruman. But no matter how powerful Saruman and Sauron, his master, seem, it is the small people that ultimately defeat this evil for good, not without cost. It is through great sacrifice, and when Frodo returns, he will never recover from his adventure. He will never be the same. The only thing he can do is to write it down in the Red Book and hand it over to Sam so that they can tell their children, and that people will remember this story and remember that they too are part of a much bigger story that they have to play a role in, as if they were hobbits. But the moral of the story is, no matter how small you feel, how insignificant you are, the pure of heart will be stronger than the greatest evil in the world. This is what I pray for when I think of my friends in Ukraine. And I've been so touched by seeing their courage on social media. I'm following a number of them on TikTok, and they tell their stories, and I'm so in awe of how courageous they are. Yes, they are afraid, but at the same time, they all communicate the same message. We believe in our country. We believe that there is a future for democracy. This is what we've been fighting for so many years. We've given so much of ourselves to preserve democracy, to let it grow and flourish. We will not see to darkness. We will not be afraid. And what is also super encouraging is that the world comes together to stand around Ukraine, and I hope they will continue to do that. Almost like the Fellowship of the Ring, when Frodo is there and he's like, I will carry it, I will take that ring. And everybody is like, okay, but now we need to stand with this little one. And then it's this wonderful scene, where Aragorn, or is it Boromir, you will have my sword, and Gimli, and my axe. And I love that. It's this same heartwarming thing that you now see in the entire world, where the people are not leaving our friends in Ukraine to fight alone. No, we are there, even if it's only with our prayers and with our thoughts. That seems so insignificant. And there's been so much backlash against that. Oh, thoughts and prayers. Who needs thoughts and prayers? Well, I'm thinking, you know what? Thoughts and prayers, those are the forces, the small, whispering, gentle forces that will overcome the worst evil, the most violent evil. If we start, what can we do faced with so much threat and so much darkness in our world? It's to do what Tolkien wrote to Christopher on the verge of this Second World War. Never forget your own hobbitry. Be that hobbit. Be good. Be pure. Carry the weight of evil and darkness with your brothers and sisters. Form a fellowship, and you will be stronger than Saruman and Sauron. They will not be able to win, because you have friends, and friendship is always stronger in history than darkness. Because where there is love, God himself is there. Ubi caritas, Deus ibi est. So let us unite in thoughts and prayers, the signs and the language of friendship. And let us make sure that we always look into our own hearts and ask ourselves, am I a tree that is rooted in faith and hope and love? And if so, I can trust that I will contribute to the world, to the future, to springtime, because I will bear fruit. And those fruits will form the beginning of a new morning, of a new springtime. And we should never forget that. We should always hope and stand with the people who are maybe losing hope. Let them feel that they are not alone, but that we are there as friends at their side. Amen.